Joining me now to talk about this is the director of the Office of Management and Budget, former Congressman Mick Mulvaney. Director Mulvaney, always good to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Jake, thanks very much for having me as always.
I know you want to talk about policy, but I do just want to ask about some of the White House personnel issues. When General Kelly is sworn in on Monday as White House Chief of Staff, will all staff members immediately begin reporting to him?
I don't know. I answer to the Chief of Staff, and I will continue to do that. The Office of Management and Budget actually reports directly to the Chief of Staff. Obviously, we answer to the President, as everybody does in the West Wing. But as far as I know, my reporting doesn't change, nor do I have any reason for it to change. So we'll continue to do our business at OMB the same way we did last week. I think we're doing some good work and look forward to continuing that under General Kelly's leadership.
I guess one of the reasons I'm asking is just because some of the people who have worked at the White House or work continuously at the White House say that because there are so many different power centers and people who seemingly have equal status to the Chief of Staff, it can be confusing, and that's one of the reasons for the chaos. So, for instance, do you happen to know if Anthony Scaramucci, the new communications director, who said when he came on board that he reports directly to the President, will he have to report to John Kelly? Do you have any idea?
Again, I've seen those same reports, and I recognize that sort of narrative is out there. All I know is it's very clear what we do at OMB, and that's not going to change. So I really can't speak to the other reporting within the White House.
Let me turn to health care. Following this week's collapse of Republican efforts to repeal Obamacare and, on occasion, replace it, the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said he's ready to move on to other issues. President Trump seems pretty stuck on the issue. He's been tweeting about it all weekend long, including this morning. This is what he tweeted yesterday, quote, "Unless the Republican senators are total quitters, repeal and replace is not dead. Demand another vote before voting on any other bill." Is this official White House policy that nothing should be voted on in Congress, not even the debt ceiling, before the Senate votes again on health care?
Well, I think, yes. And I think what you're seeing there is the President simply reflecting the mood of the people. Go and poll the American public and find out what the most important issue is to them right now, and it's health care. So in the White House's view, they can't move on in the Senate. In the people's view, they should move on in the Senate. They should stay and work and figure out a way to solve this problem. Keep in mind, you're talking about something they've promised to do for 7 years. You can't promise folks you're going to do something for 7 years and then not do it. So in addition to this policy consideration, you do have Obamacare. It is failing. It is hurting people. So to not change it allows that to go forward. That's a policy consideration. At the same time, you have the political consideration that you promise folks you do this for 7 years. You cannot go back on that. So yes, they need to stay. They need to work. They need to pass something. And I think that's not only official White House position on this right now, it's sort of the national attitude towards it.
Well, their polls indicate that the American people, a plurality of them, support Obamacare, but I don't want to get into a whole discussion of what the American people want. I do want to ask you about a tweet that President Trump sent out Saturday that it was kind of cryptic. He wrote, "If a new health care bill is not approved quickly, bailouts for insurance companies and bailouts for members of Congress will end very soon." On the bailouts for insurance companies, I'll get to that in a second, but is the President threatening to cut off funding for the health insurance plans for members of Congress? Is that what that means, bailouts for members of Congress?
Yeah, actually, I talked to the President at length about that exact issue yesterday, and I think his attitude is this, and his attitude is pretty simple. Keep in mind, he does have this way of channeling a large number of the American public, and what he's saying is, look, if Obamacare is hurting people, and it is, then why shouldn't it hurt insurance companies and, more importantly, perhaps for this discussion, members of Congress? There is a certain benefit that members of Congress get as part of an OPM decision from a couple years ago. And I think the President is simply looking at this and going, is this fair? Is it fair that Obamacare is hurting people, that if you live in a county that's what we call now a bare county with no coverage, if you're obliged by law to buy something that's not for sale and that's hurting you, or if you've got a coverage but can't afford to go to the doctor and that's hurting you, shouldn't insurance companies and members of Congress bear some of that burden as well? So I'm familiar with that issue. We'll see what happens as we move forward.
So that's on the chopping block, perhaps taking away the health care plans, the health insurance plans for members of Congress. Would he target staff members for this as well?
Keep in mind, Jake, back up just a second. You don't take away coverage for members of Congress and so forth. Members of Congress are obliged by law to participate in the exchanges. I did when I was a member of Congress. But there was also a decision from the Office of Personnel Management a couple years ago that allowed a special exemption to the rules on employer contributions to those plans. So it's not a concept of taking coverage away. It's the approach of actually obliging members of Congress to follow the exact law that the folks that they govern are following.
So forcing them onto the Obamacare exchanges, is that what it is?
No, they are already on the exchanges. Let's make that clear. All that stuff you read on the internet that Congress exempted themselves from Obamacare is not right. When I was a member of Congress, I had to be on the exchanges. The special exemption dealt with the employer contribution, how much your employer, when you're a member of Congress, that's the federal government, can contribute to your coverage. And that's the rule that the president was talking about in his tweet yesterday.
Lastly, sir, are you optimistic that General Kelly, Secretary Kelly, will bring a discipline to the White House that is needed?
Absolutely. I think that's why he's there. I take Reince at his word. I don't think Reince is hiding the ball on this at all. The president wanted to change directions, wanted to go a different way in the way that office was managed. I think Reince was terribly effective, but was probably a little bit more laid back and independent in the way he ran the office. And I think the president wants to go a different direction, wants a little bit more discipline, a little more structure in there. You know that he enjoys working with generals. We have several of them in the administration who are doing extraordinary jobs, and the president likes that. So I simply think you saw him say, you know what, let's try a different direction when it comes to Chief of Staff. I'm actually looking forward to working with John Kelly. He's been a tremendous Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. I've enjoyed working with him for the last 6 months, and I'm actually excited about the next several months.
Director Mulvaney, it's always good to have you. Thanks for joining us this morning. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jake.